Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Merci de nous rejoindre pour cette...
Thank you for your presence for the new controversy. The objective would be to talk about the limited low progression of unskilled workers. It is something that can it be changed? To answer this question, Marie-Ange president of the of Keolis, which is a affiliate of SNCF, which of course has to deal with this on a daily basis. And you know, we used public transport. And next to her, Pierre-André de CHALENDAR, former president of Saint-Gobain, who today is president of the Institute of the Enterprise, of the Industry of Fabric, and the president of the Surveillance Committee of the Council of ESSEC. So, well, the idea is to talk about a topic which is at the heart of our the news. The true question today, is there a future, and how do we manage the future of unskilled labor today? And is there or low-skilled labor? You know, we know that in the past, major managers such as Jürgen Schrepp, who started as an apprentice within Mercedes, became the boss of Daimler-Benz. Is it still possible? 2 minutes, maybe, to do a first observation? Madame Marie-Ange? 2 minutes. You gave the example, right? It's amazing because at Keolis, until recently, the manager of the US, who manages 1 billion turnover in Keolis, with David Scorey, he started at age 16, as a supervisor and a foreman. We're not talking about France or the social regime. We have the vocational training, but you know, he's going to retire, and this is a clear example of applied to Keolis. We are a service company, so a lot of collaborators. For me, what it is, social, you know, I don't, well, in the public transport business and in companies like Keolis, clearly, it says things can be changed, you know, through vocational training progression. Collaborators can evolve and move up the scale and move up the ladder. And we get people who have absolutely no training whatsoever, and we can even come without even being a driver, without driving license, you know. They get training, they get their driver's license, so there is no need for a university, academic pathway, a career. And then, of course, there is training, polyvalence, progression. And there are sectors. I mean, does it apply to other sectors? Well, maybe we could be more cautious, but the public transport domain is a clear, marked example of things that can be changed, you know, the growth of for low-skilled workers. Mr. de CHALENDAR, sometimes it is considered that the employees are considered invisible in the industry. Is it a topic, or do you end up with the observation made by Marie-Ange about the role and the possible progression of those employees? Well, I think the topic of low-skilled workers is a quite significant stake, especially if it generates frustration. And we can see that if it comes with a feeling of frustration or degrading, it can generate anger, you know, the yellow jacket, and it's and it is a social aspect which is essential for the country. Now, if we want to see who are the low-skilled workers, well, 4 aspects are essential. Most of them are in the tertiary domain, services. Historically, they were more in the industry. Why are less in the industry? Why are they less in the industry? Now, for 2 reasons. One, which I find bad, that there is less industry, so that's not good news. And one, which is good, which that in the industry experiences more changes than the services in terms of technology, in terms of productivity. Productivity in the industry was high, so there are changes in the type of jobs, and therefore we need to train, and therefore there is a high qualification. All the automation, all the automation waves were causing less jobs for low-skilled people. So it's more for the services. So I'm calling, I want reindustrialization of France, but we have to be realistic. It's not by going from 10 to 12, 15% of leisure employment that we're going to solve the problem of low-skilled workers. But it's interesting because it confirms the role of social lift, which was the case of industry. So it's an issue, but I did not quite face it at Saint-Gobain, where the skills, you know, is quite natural. Training is done. Second characteristics, and this is why it could become a social stake. The second characteristic is that there are more women, more young people, 15 to 24, in low-skilled workers. They are often unemployed, more often unemployed, and it is for all of them, they have a lower working period time because, and this is French specificity, because otherwise we find the same characteristic in other countries, but in France is that we have a high percentage of you know, part-time jobs, you know, and that concerns the low-skilled workers. So there is clearly something at stake here, which has to be solved, and we have to do it, and especially in domains where the issue arises, but not in the industry. So, as a reaction, where André is right at one point there, there's one of the last point, which is often one of the issues that we combine several problems in one. So, one which is, you know, the hardness of work. You know, there is it's hard jobs, or you know, hardship labor, and second topic are the single parents families, women mainly. You know, 80% of single parent families are women, are actually headed by women, and when we have low skill, hard work, and a single parent family, in fact, you make the topic more complex to be dealt with. So often there is a barrier because there are several negative factors that have to be worked on. But those are often jobs which are under tension, and it's difficult to find jobs or to find employees. You explain it in your once in a while, saying that recruitment sometimes is in some professions, you know, not for you, but we know in restaurants, hospitality, and they even use immigration, and sometimes you know, undocumented immigration. We remain a profession under stress for 3 or 4 years. We multiplied action, but an example to show the capacity of integration, we've worked with the Association of Inclusion through Sport, and there you see people who are very far from work or employment, young people who can't get up in the morning, but when it means going to a football field, the soccer field, they can be motivated. What we've done through insertion through sport with our institution, a phase which is in time. First, collective work. We had the teams would go to the stadium, support the young, accompany the young people. Then we would take them to training, and then we show them work, money, and you get them back into professional life pathway. And then you have to manage the career evolution, such as polyvalence, salary increase, because there must be fees. You know, promotion can be hierarchical or it can be financial. At the end, eventually, today, one of the problems, don't you think it could be the fact that we are more in a polyvalence dimension? They know people should evolve in different professions, but it's not a social progression as we've known it in the past. Mr. CHALENDAR. Well, progression can be seen in 2 ways. It is a progression in terms of content, of labor, and clearly there is a vertical element historically. And what we can see is that in many jobs, service jobs, there is the education to management doesn't exist in initial trainings, unlike what we have more often in technical training. So yes, if there is training for management is lower, well, the possibility for promotion, vertical promotion, is more limited. In many service professions, it's more difficult. Then there is the issue of mobility, professional mobility or geographic mobility. And there, what strikes me is that there is a difference, more depending on the size of the company. And the size of the company, when you are in a certain large, medium or large size company, well, there are human resource manager service, there are, and therefore they pay attention to these topics, and which is a bit of a luxury when the company is smaller. Let me give you an example. When you do recruitment,
Dans les différentes
So in the different subsidiaries of Saint-Gobain, we very rarely recruit somebody for the job that they're actually going to do. We recruit somebody with the idea that, we think about what they can do with that person for the next 5 or 10 years, and at all levels. In an SME, you recruit people for a specific job. So if you're recruiting somebody for 5 to 10 years' time, then training is much more natural. So this training, is it training of middle managers, Mrs. DEBOIN, identifying talents for jobs that we sometimes consider as invisible? Do we have to change the way we look at the whole system? Well, two things. With respect to versatility. Versatility, we think of it from 2 points of view for organization of work. If you have drivers who can drive buses, trams, and subway, then your organization is much more flexible. But also from the point of view of the employees, when they prefer working in the subway, they prefer to be closed off from the public, they might have different expectations, and they might want to move towards controllers or drivers, for example. They can go up the management pyramid. In other words, they're drivers to begin with, but then they can be supervisors. On some lines, you can have drivers who supervise. A driver can have the responsibility of 50 other drivers. They started as drivers, or they can be behind screens in the control room. So there's a lot of variety, there's a lot of versatility, there's a possibility for promotion. But one thing that we pay attention to is that, there's a middle management layer where we worked a lot at Keolis. It was the idea of learning what leadership is. We're not talking about being part of an executive committee. We're talking about how do you motivate 50 drivers? What messages do you share with them? How do you give them prospects? How do you explain to them what the company is doing and where it's going? So it's not something that's innate. It's something that you have to learn. But it's about motivating the troops, motivating employees, and it's about giving them career prospects. And versatility, this means training, right, which is what you do. And if I think about things, putting Keolis to one side, it's a very virtuous company. But for those who are low-skilled, if we take the national statistics, 72% of employees on average have had training. So this dates back to 2022. 27% of low-skilled workers received training in 2022. So we're creating a vicious circle, therefore. We're training people who are already qualified. So training people who are not qualified. So obviously big companies do this, but globally not often. Now, what about the return on investment? Is it complicated for long-term training? Is that why? And the economic interest is not in line with what is being done? Well, when you have a medium-term vision of employees, you invest in training. When you recruit people, you look at the job and you wonder whether to train the person. If you don't have the right framework, general management framework, well, you hesitate because you think, oh, this person's going to leave as soon as they're trained. But training demands a lot of effort and it involves a lot of people. Now, companies shoulder the responsibility mainly, but then there's the French system, the idea of pooling training. That's also something that's very important. It's important to work with the most fragile members of the general public as well, because, you know, you can have training organized by businesses, but on top of that, how do you target those that are exposed to a lot of hardship? And this often starts, you know, with the fact that they don't master French. How do you start with basic training with people like this? And if you have single parents as well, how do you provide support to them? How do you give them time for training? Now, one of the subjects that has come up over the past 3 days is the subject of artificial intelligence. So we've got a few minutes left. Now, today, what will artificial intelligence have in terms of impact on these low-skilled workers? Will it, in the future, give them a new lease of life in terms of their jobs, or on the contrary, will they wonder if it's going to be a negative impact? Can we just bring up another subject first? When we talk about, you know, the prospects of these workers, we're talking about career prospects, versatility, but you know, we're also talking about remuneration. Now, that we have a real problem in France with our systems where we're trying to reduce costs. Well, that's because there are too many costs. So we're trying to reduce costs on low salaries. In France, compared with other countries, we have a lot of employees who have a minimum wage. So when we're reducing costs at that level, for an employee might have 100 euros more, you've got to provide 2.4. And if I take the point of view of the employee, from the point of view of their income, they've got an increase in 100 euros, but they'd have to have 580 because of the bonuses that are available. So there is no incentive to increase the salary for the employee and for the employer. So that's a huge obstacle. So let's finish with AI. There is a controversy, and I'd like to play devil's advocate here. What is the notion of a decent salary? Do all companies you know, have the same approach? And then there's the notion of sharing added value. Are we doing things as efficiently as we can in businesses with respect to employees? What about, you know, your remuneration system itself and how it follows a hierarchy? And so there are questions relating to this aspect. You know, how do you share the value created? It's a very complex question. So for AI, there are two ideas, two theories. Some people say it's going to be a revolution in all sectors, especially at the intermediate level. There'll be even more low-skilled labor. So that's the first theory, and it's the theory we hear most often. Now, my experience of previous waves of automation, is AI like robotization? I don't know, but it's not exactly the contrary either. We've been through successive waves of automation. What I'm seeing is after several years, all of these waves of technological progress and automation, at the end of the day, this was good for qualifications, and that's why we have fewer low-skilled workers in industry. So it wasn't bad in terms of employment, so it wasn't bad. So there are two theories, and I think my theory, the one I prefer, is a minority theory, but we'll only know, in the future. It's very disruptive, yes. So the cards are reshuffled because of that. The relationship of people to digital technologies is pretty complex. It's segmented. In the studies that we do, for example, we see elderly people who, they don't know what to do with digital technology. But it's more complicated than that, in fact, because there's a whole share of population who, as of 65 and 70, they became quite agile from a technical point of view. Then there are the very young who never had the basics. Now, they might be very agile on their phone. And then there are others who might be quite disturbed by digital technology. So the impact of AI means that we have to rethink training entirely. And that is a big problem when we think about our jobs and sectors, generally speaking. How do we train people in sciences, in maths, especially young people? We're not very good at this. Girls especially are not as well trained for different cultural reasons, and including if we take the latest reforms. So mathematics and science classes, they're still problematic. So to conclude, we've just got 1 minute left. Are you optimistic with respect to the ability to allow for social prospects, or you're pessimistic? I'm pessimistic. There's a major factor at the moment that we're hearing about, and that is changes to population numbers. We're seeing the results already. So for a year and a half now, we've got a climate that's not as good. Everybody's seen an increase in unemployment. There are fewer people arriving on the labor market. So changes to population are having a consequence on the labor market. This means that the relationship between companies and employees are going to change, that companies, well, today, they're already finding it difficult to recruit. It won't get any better. If they want to recruit in the future, they will have to be more attractive. So they need to get to grips with the problems. So that means that low-skilled labor, well, it means there has to be a project. There has to be some kind of collective pride generated. So tasks need to be seen as more attractive. And that's important for companies that want to keep hold of their employees. So the populations that are arriving on the labor market today are really quite different. Their relationship to temping is quite difficult. They're quite happy with short-term contracts and temping work, perhaps more so, more comfortable with that than with a long-term contract. And some people are working twice as hard. They have two jobs. So collective agility, and this short-term vision. We're no longer thinking about pursuing the same career for our whole lives. This is disruptive, but it also shows our constant ability to adapt, and companies need to adapt to employees because the power struggle has been reversed today in terms of supply and demand when it comes to work. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions.